Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Murray Sinclair, the former Chief Commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, has died. We'll take a look at his legacy and what reconciliation means to you. And November is National Diabetes Month. We'll take a look at the impact diabetes can have on your loved ones and how to best support them. I'm Amy Bell, in for Michelle Elliott, and this is BC Today. And thank you for joining us on radio, TV, and live stream. You can call us now on our top story. What has truth and reconciliation meant to you? And what work still needs to be done? Our number is 604-669-3733. You can also call 1-800-825-5950 or hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email us your comments, bctoday@cbc.ca. And Murray Sinclair, the former Chief Commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, has passed away. He was admired for his work advancing justice for Indigenous people, and he did so in many roles, as a lawyer, a judge, and a senator. He will also be remembered for pushing Canada's painful history of residential schools to the forefront of our culture. CBC's Cameron McIntosh takes us through Sinclair's life and legacy.
There have always been those who are deniers of history.
A respected elder and statesman, Murray Sinclair laid the path for reconciliation in Canada.
And this nation must never forget what it once did to its most vulnerable people.
Born in 1951, raised in Selkirk, Manitoba, Sinclair's Anishinaabe name meant the one who speaks of pictures in the sky. He excelled in school, skipping 2 grades, was a star athlete and valedictorian, who went into law, originally aiming to enter politics.
I really became bitten by the law bug.
Racial hurdles were quickly apparent. As a young lawyer dealing with a client, a police officer mistook him for the accused.
He grabbed me by the arm and was going to lead me back to the cells because he assumed the white guy was the lawyer.
In 1988, Sinclair became Manitoba's first ever Indigenous provincial court judge. After a police killing of an Indigenous man, he was co-commissioner of a tension-filled inquiry into racism in Manitoba's justice system. He quickly felt backlash.
An RCMP officer came to my house and said, we have information that a City of Winnipeg police officer has threatened to kill you.
Nothing came of it. Sinclair kept asking hard questions. He rose to Queen's Bench and also led an inquest into the deaths of 12 infants in pediatric care in Manitoba. But it was the 2008 Truth and Reconciliation Commission where Sinclair cast the most light, spending 6 years listening to residential school survivors, uncovering truths he knew many would not want or be able to accept.
And the phrase I used to use with the staff is that we have to write this for the reasonable.
His 94 calls to action have brought some progress, particularly around awareness, but many remain unfulfilled.
The public still largely struggles with the question of what can we do about it.
Shortly after the TRC, he did get that career in politics, appointed as an independent senator in 2016. He served nearly 5 years, a platform he used to promote reconciliation.
I've been involved in the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Why can't you just get over it and move on? And my answer has always been, why can't you always remember this?
He turned down consideration for Governor General, citing a desire to spend time with his family, but was a member of the Order of Canada. Through it all, he became one of Canada's most respected Indigenous voices. A mentor to many, including Manitoba's first Anishinaabe Premier, through his career, Sinclair dealt with countless stories of pain, despair, and racism, but at his core, remained an optimist.
As long as we have that belief in the need to improve the future, then the future will be improved.
Change he acknowledged would be slow, but remained confident is inevitable. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
President of the Nuu-chah-nulth Tribal Council, Judith Sayers, joined the early edition this morning. CBC's Stephen Quinn asked her about Sinclair's legacy with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and how it has reshaped Canada's approach to Indigenous rights and reconciliation.
I think that it was a huge impact. I mean, today, everybody operates on the calls to action from the TRC in every area. It is something that has spawned reconciliation awards. It has put companies in different places. I mean, even BC Hydro has a reconciliation plan. You know, that like there are just so many things that have arisen from that report.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, calling, people grading governments on how much they've actually achieved. And so it set a new standard, for reconciliation and working with Indigenous people in this country. So it was very significant.
And what about the progress that's been made on those calls to action? Do you know how he felt about it? Because there's been, a lot of talk, but a lot that still needs to be, worked on, even started in some cases.
Yeah, and he was very clear about that. Even, obtaining materials that were needed. Whenever he had an opportunity, he spoke out about things that weren't being done.
Yeah.
But I also heard him praising things that were done. So I think he was very fair in that way. But definitely there's still a long road to go on
Yeah.
reconciliation. But with the foundation he helped set, the work is in progress, and I'm sure he felt good about that.
President of the Nuu-chah-nulth Tribal Council, Judith Sayers, speaking with Stephen Quinn on the early edition. And we are paying tribute to Murray Sinclair, an Anishinaabe senator and legendary Manitoba lawyer who led the National Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He died today at the age of 73 in Winnipeg. And we want to hear from you. What has truth and reconciliation meant to you, and what work still needs to be done towards truth and reconciliation in BC? Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone, and you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. And joining us now is Adam Olson, former MLA for Saanich North in the Islands and a member of the Tsartlip First Nations. Hi, Adam. Thanks for joining us. Oh, we're not able to hear you there, Adam. We might just be having a little issue. Oh, there we go.
Muted. Thanks for the invite. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. So as we reflect on the life of Murray Sinclair, what are some of the memories that you have?
Well, as somebody who was elected to the Legislative Assembly here in British Columbia in 2017, born and raised on Cellphone, which is part of the Saanich Nation, one of the villages here and just outside of Victoria. Got elected in 2017, and of course that was just a couple of years after the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action was published and the commission was completed. It had both a professional and a personal implication for me, as I have the descendant of residential and day school survivors, and so it was both a very politically important moment for my family and for my community and for Indigenous people across the country.
Mm-hmm.
But now as a legislator, there was work to do. And, I was very proud to be a part of that Legislative Assembly in 2019, just, 4 years after the report was tabled. One of the more challenging calls to action, well, there's so many calls to action that have yet to be implemented.
Mm-hmm.
The passing of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People into law, shifting from Aboriginal rights entitled denial to a legal theory of recognition,
Mm-hmm.
is remarkable. And it's something that I'm always going to be proud of as a legislator, to stand unanimously in that Legislative Assembly and doing some of the most difficult work actually in shifting that political theory that legal theory that has long been at the center of the conflict here in British Columbia.
Mm. And
I'll just say, how does this link to the work that Murray Sinclair did? Well, that groundbreaking work,
mm-hmm.
as we heard in his bio, just an unbelievable leader and show of leadership over decades. Murray Sinclair led to this really groundbreaking recognition of what has happened.
Yeah.
A sobering, I think, of the Canadian public, brought by someone who is just so dignified and so thoughtful and clearly articulating the challenge that was in front of all Canadians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike.
An extraordinary man, truly. And, as you said, he did this extraordinary work, spending 6 years speaking across the country with people that had been impacted by the residential schools. And he's really brought this language into the forefront so that people on both sides of reconciliation can understand the work that needs to be done. But as you said, there were 94 calls to action. Only 13, I believe, at this point have been completed. What do we need to do to really push this forward?
Well, I think that just one of his quotes that from his own words, why can't you always remember this? I think is a really important something to elevate here, and just an example of how articulate, how beautiful his words were, and will be definitely missed in the Canadian in the Canadian body of work that needs to be done ahead for reconciliation. Why can't you always remember this? And I think that it is incumbent upon governments, it's incumbent upon elected officials to never forget the history that we've come from. All of that work that was to go across the country over 6 years to gather those stories. That was an emotional and just a heavy toll on those commissioners to be there, to hear those stories and to collect those stories. Because once of course you've asked someone to tell their story, there is a responsibility to then follow through. And I think that as long past the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, those calls to action, Murray Sinclair and his the fellow commissioners have continued to be the face and the voice of that important work long after the work was actually complete, knowing that it is never over. So, I think that it's important to recognize just the life commitment of Mr. Sinclair to this important work, and I think that it's a good example for those of us who have been in public life, the commitment that we make to and the important work that we have even after we leave office to continue to have these conversations and to raise these issues in the public.
I'm going to take a call now, Adam, from Mary in Sook. Hi, Mary. Mary, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can, Mary. Thanks so much for joining our conversation. How do you feel about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and, how it's impacted you or what we need to do?
Well, as I said in our pre-interview, I just moved here 2 years ago from the Yukon Territory, where being aware of the problems with the relationship between the what are we called, the colonists and the First Nations is not news in the Yukon, because the Yukon had, first of all, the first impact for the Yukon was the gold rush, when thousands of white people came to the Yukon and just took over. And it was very interesting at that time. The leader of the people who lived in Dawson City and that area, the leader of those people took the stories of those people and gave them to the people who lived downstream on the Yukon River, who were of the same type of First Nation, and gave the stories from Dawson to the people downstream.
Okay.
That's a cool thing. And in 2000, I think it was, there was a ceremony back in Dawson City when the stories were returned to the First Nations in Dawson City. And the white people were very aware of this transfer of information and how valuable it was from one people to another.
Mm-hmm.
And the other insult to First Nations in the Yukon was the building of the Alaska Highway, when the First Nation was just steamrollered. When the people came with their heavy equipment and just drove through what had been villages and destroyed houses and trap lines, and again with no asking or assessing the situation.
Right.
And so the people, the white people in the Yukon, are very aware of these insults to First Nations. So I was shocked when I moved to BC and people are going, what's truth and reconciliation? Why do we need it?
So you feel that here in BC we're lagging behind other areas of the country in terms
absolutely. Yep.
Oh, well, that's
it's like people in BC have no idea that these insults to First Nations people have happened,
mm-hmm.
and that these insults and these thefts have happened. They're completely unaware of it, it seems, in BC.
Mm. That's an interesting point. Thank you very much for that, Mary. I appreciate that. We'll bring in Bernadette now in Sydney. Hi, Bernadette. How are you?
Hi, Amy. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for calling today.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. Condolences to all First Nations people on the death of Murray Sinclair. One thing that I've been doing, Amy, and I've been out of the country for a long time, and came back and realized that in the intervening time that there was a lot more programming about First Nations. And so I regularly listen to programming and learn about First Nations culture through those programming like Unreserved Rosanna Deerchild. And, it's a way of learning about the rich culture of the arts and the ceremonies and all that kind of thing.
For sure.
So, I've really enjoyed that. And also Laura Lynch, I like her programs because she's in touch with what First Nations people are doing here in BC from an eco point of view. And so that's really helpful. And one thing I also do is because I have had people come up and make overt racist remarks about First Nations people, and I always reply and say, look, I'm sorry, I'm not on the same page as you with this, and I never will be. And I just handle it that way because, we can just sort of feed into this, and it's wrong. It's clearly wrong in this day and age. And the other thing, like the other day, I said to somebody, about Turtle Island, and everybody just gave me a blank stare because they didn't know what Turtle Island is, Yeah,
there's still.
Yeah. So we have a lot to learn, and I've just joined a reconciliation group here in Sydney, and we're working with people up in the Sonic First Nation removing invasive English ivy. And it was a lovely way to connect in a circle and, just learn more about the land around here. I used to live up on the Sechelt Nation, but and it was easier to connect with people there. It's not so easy here on the island, so you really have to kind of make an effort to go out.
It sounds like you're doing a fabulous job, Bernadette, making that effort and working to educate yourself and to educate those around you. So I appreciate your call, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing. Adam, you hear somebody like Bernadette refusing to sort of politely put up with racism, who's trying to educate herself. Do we hear that more and more, or is Bernadette still a bit of a outlier?
No, I mean, I think that there has been, as was said about that, I think Judith Sayers mentioned in the early edition this morning, talking about Murray Sinclair and the patience and the long suffering, or put it a different way, the commitment that was made to, I think in a story that was published this morning, talking about reconciliation being about mutual respect. I think that over the last decade, and starting with maybe I Don't Know More, and then in 2013, and then following that up with the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, there's been tremendous advances in the relationship, the Crown Indigenous relationship here. And it's important to acknowledge those steps that are being taken. It's important to acknowledge the journey that both Mary and Bernadette have demonstrated here, that all British Columbians and all Canadians are on to some extent. To listen to where British Columbia might be in comparison to our neighbors to the north in the Yukon, and comparing British Columbia to the other provinces, we're still the only province in the country to have legislated the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. It's also important to acknowledge that that the history here in this province is dramatically different than the vast majority of the rest of the country, and so we do have a lot more work to do in British Columbia in order to reconcile. And so, if we're taking that advice of trying to achieve mutual respect for one another, and overcome what's been ingrained in our education systems, and just basically what's been kind of socially accepted over decades, these beliefs, the very backward beliefs about Indigenous people, I think that we do have a lot of work to do. However, I think it's important to acknowledge that we've traveled a long way down this road, and we're in a much better place than, say, when I first got elected in local government back in 2008.
We'll have to leave it there, but I really appreciate your time with us. Always nice to speak, Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Adam Olson, former MLA for Saanich North and the Islands and member of Sarlip First Nation. It is 12:27 and this is BC Today. The Early Editions political panel took on the issue of how women voters will impact the U.S. presidential election. Here's former BC Minister of Finance Elizabeth Cull, followed by BC Green leader Sonia Furstenau, then Beyond a Ballot CEO Rachel Siegel.
Women generally have very strong opinions about who should have control over their bodies, and that has emerged as one of the key issues in this campaign. And I think women may be silently voting for Kamala Harris, even in areas where normally they would have voted Republican, simply over issues like that.
And Sonia?
Yeah, my daughter last night brought up the ad about the women, being told by their husbands how to vote and then having the option to go into the polling booth. She was really struck by this. She's actually doing a report right now on political cartoons that reference women in oppressive patriarchal societies. This is very important, and I'm pleased that my daughter is paying so much attention, but I think women around the world should be paying attention to this election and the implications it has for all of us.
And Rachel, briefly?
It's huge, and it's unfortunate that Kamala Harris's campaign has had to pivot. And actually, you haven't heard her talk a lot about being a woman in this campaign. And a lot of the narrative around that is that Hillary Clinton was so much the poster child of women in politics that they actually think that hurt her in the United States. So Kamala's campaign has shifted to not really talk about it. And I think it's this secret society of women across America that are going out in droves. And there's stories about that. The number of polling stations that just have so many women lined up to vote that are going out, and they are going to support her tomorrow.
You're listening to and watching BC Today on CBC. We're on Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC. You can find us on YouTube at CBC Vancouver and on the CBC News app. The CBC News with Robert Zimmerman is next.
Good afternoon. A labor dispute is set to once again shut down BC ports. Port employers plan to lock out more than 700 foremen at 4:30 this afternoon. This comes after union members began limited strike activity this morning. The Stanley Park seawall is closed from Prospect Point to Third Beach from today until December 6th. The closure is related to ongoing work to remove trees from the park due to damage from hemlock looper moth. The parking lot at Prospect Point Cafe will also be closed. And about 100,000 BC Hydro customers are still without power after strong winds blew through the south coast and interior overnight. Most of the outages are here in the lower mainland. It's not clear when power will be fully restored. And now taking a look at the forecast, unsettled conditions continue around the province with strong winds and heavy rain in many areas. Heavy snow is also expected along highways in the interior. On the north coast, mainly cloudy and windy this afternoon with a high of 9. Highs around +1 with snow in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, periods of rain with strong winds and a high of 6. Highs to 5 degrees with rain in the Kootenays, snow at higher terrain there. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, showers with a high of 8. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, clearing this afternoon with highs around 11 degrees. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you, Robert. And both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are spending these final days of campaigning in key swing states. 75 million Americans have already voted. Millions more will cast their ballots tomorrow, but very few remain undecided. And those are the voters both Harris and Trump are scrambling to win over in these final hours. Here's some of the two candidates urging supporters to get out and vote. You'll hear Trump first, then Harris.
If we get everybody out and vote, there's not a thing they can do. And if we don't, they have to get every person that ever signed anything in that horrendously dangerous party that's going to destroy our country. We cannot let that happen. So here's my only purpose in even being here today: get out and vote.
In these final hours, let us remember that there is power in knowing that we are together, and let us remember that your vote is your voice, and your voice is your power. And you are powerful, and you remember that.
Presidential candidates Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. You can follow coverage of the U.S. election throughout the day tomorrow. CBC News will keep you up to date throughout the day. And then at 8 p.m., join Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault for the CBC News live special, America Votes, on CBC TV, CBC News Network, and CBC Gem, and streaming everywhere you get CBC News. You can also join Susan Bonner and Pia Chattopadhyay as they host America Votes on CBC Radio and CBC Listen at 8 p.m. Eastern. And November may be Diabetes Awareness Month, but for those living with diabetes, each month is filled by the challenges that come with managing this complex, often invisible condition. Every 3 minutes, someone in Canada is diagnosed with diabetes. And that's a diagnosis that takes up their time and energy and attention around the clock. It impacts all aspects of their lives. And in fact, people living with diabetes are 2 to 3 times more likely to live with depression. So how can we help and support the people in our lives who have diabetes? And how has diabetes impacted your life? Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. Now, for more on this, we are joined by Laura Siren, President and CEO of Diabetes Canada. Hi, Laura. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me today.
So, Laura, you aren't just the president and CEO. You also have type 2 diabetes. Walk us through from, I guess, when you were diagnosed and then how it's impacted your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was diagnosed about 8 years ago now, and I don't have any diabetes in the family. My family's a cancer family, so I was always nervous about doing all my screenings. And I'll still never forget, I was going for my annual physical, which I went for every year. No one ever said anything to me about your blood sugars getting high. That was probably a mistake. And then my doctor turned around in her chair and said, "So you have diabetes?" And then she just continued talking. And for all of your listeners who might have gone through that experience, it's really quite unreal. Like you're sort of stunned. And at least for me, I didn't know enough about diabetes, to be totally honest, to understand what that really meant. What was my life going to be so different? Was my lifespan going to be shortened? Did I have to go on insulin right away? I really had a lot of misconceptions around diabetes. The other thing I felt at that moment, and not everyone feels this, but a lot do, I felt a lot of personal shame. I thought, I think diabetes is something I gave myself. I probably didn't work out enough. I didn't eat well enough. And when she was talking, I really wasn't listening because I was just going through all this sort of self-blaming. And so it's taken me a long time to work through that. Life is very different now. I wear a continuous glucose monitor on my arm. I am continually aware of, are my sugars going up? Are they going down? If they go down, how do I get them back up? We're all aiming for that, what's called time in target, like right where you're supposed to stay in the middle. It's very hard. If you get sick, if you're working out, if you're doing whatever, it's just 24/7, 365. You're always on the clock. And that's why our theme for this Diabetes Awareness Month is Let's Make Time, because I think it's been for me since my diagnosis and education about what is it. Also really working to get over and understand that it wasn't my fault. And that there's lots of reasons people get diabetes: genetics, your environment, stress, many things. And then I've learned that I can live very well if I manage it well. And that's the trade-off. It's you're constantly vigilant so that the complications of diabetes, and there's 5 big ones, you hope not to get them.
And it's interesting. You were saying, this was something that you felt shameful about. This was something you didn't perhaps understand fully what it was going to do to your life and what you needed to do. It just sounds so incredibly overwhelming. So what can we do to support people when they're in those early stages? And you were an adult, but it is quite often children that are being diagnosed with this at a young age, and that can be incredibly overwhelming for families. So how do we sort of get in there at the very beginning so somebody isn't struggling from the start?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say that the first thing is that the more information you can gather about diabetes, my first instinct was to push information away and just think stiff upper lip, I'll push through this. And that was just a big mistake. And, you have to learn about what to do. So if you've got someone in your life that's been recently diagnosed, or you've been recently diagnosed, and as you said, it's 1 person every 3 minutes in this country. So that's a lot.
I was shocked when I read that statistic. This is, incredible. And I was trying to do the math. Well, how many people will get diagnosed, in the course of this 1-hour show? It's staggering.
Exactly. And in fact, one of the analogies we use is if diabetes is a pool, there are 4 million Canadians in the pool, and some of us are in the shallow end and some are in the deeper end. And if you're in the deeper end, you might have had a heart attack because of your diabetes, or a stroke, or you've had an amputation, or you have kidney disease and you might be on dialysis. And then so that's 4 million, that's 10%. Canada. Then at the edge of the pool, there are 6 million people who are at high risk or been officially told you have pre-diabetes. And once every 3 minutes, one of those 6 million slips in. So that's, when you think about 10 million people, that's a quarter of the population. So one of the things I always say to people is, if you're early in the diagnosis, seek information. Don't sort of bury your head in the sand. And if someone near you has that, seek information, but don't sort of push it on them. Like, be supportive and empathetic and understanding. In fact, when I came home from that doctor's appointment, I actually on the subway thought, I'm in Toronto, I thought, I don't think I'm going to tell my husband.
Really?
That's how embarrassed I was, that I thought I'd done something wrong. Then I changed my mind, and he was like, well, let's go on and start looking. And that was great for me. It was like, okay, we're going to tackle this together. we're going to understand it together. We're going to go to good sources. I did go to diabetes.ca because sometimes Dr. Google can scare you and you really want to make sure you're going to a trusted source.
Right.
And the other thing I would say for people if they're early in their diagnosis is just to ask them, how can I help? What could I do to be supportive? And sometimes they're going to say nothing, but it maybe they have a child in school that is with diabetes and they're nervous about that. And they might say, can you come over and watch my other child while I go check at the school? Or it may be your parent. And, someone can say, can I just talk to you about how this feels about my parent having this? So I would say knowledge and then empathy and understanding.
I'd love to have members of our audience join our discussion, whether they have questions about diabetes or want to share how it has impacted them and their lives. You can call us at 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. Email bctoday@cbc.ca. And we're joined today by Laura Siren. She's the president and CEO of Diabetes Canada. We do have a call now from Maurice in Vancouver. Hi, Maurice. How are you?
I'm fine.
And
How are you?
what has been your experience with diabetes?
Well, I got diagnosed in 2018.
Okay.
It was pretty. I guess it was straightforward. I mean, I was overweight, and then my doctor told me go to the lab and get a blood test. He writes the requisition. So I went, and I think that evening he called me and said, "Go to the hospital right away. Bring a book." So I went to the emergency at VGH, and I couldn't figure out why. And then they did my blood testing and everything, and they sent me upstairs to the 11th floor at that Jim Patterson Pavilion. And, they said, you got diabetes, type 2.
Wow.
So it's kind of strange, the whole thing, I guess, but that's the way I found out.
A big shock. And has that made for, a dramatic change in your life? How have you been managing it?
Well, I get more prescriptions from my doctor. I had to see an internist, and right away he gave me Ozempic, but at that time it was just 25 milligrams once a week. Now I take Ozempic 1 milligram once a week, plus all the other stuff.
Right.
I had to take, the metformin, Jardiance, statin, everything. I guess plus insulin. Then I went off insulin. Now I'm back on insulin. And,
okay.
It's kind of hard to.
So you've had quite the journey.
Yeah, I have. It's been, yes, it was quite, I don't know how you can explain it, but I had to, get used to taking all these medicines, but then I have asthma and COPD, so I was always used to getting prescriptions for this and that and the other things.
Right.
So.
But still, that's a lot to take on and to manage in addition to ongoing health issues. Was there anything that really stood out, either from perhaps your medical team or your friends and your social network that really helped to make this a bit more manageable for you to sort of, support you in this?
Well, I had a good internist, the doctor. He looks after my diabetes medicines. He was helpful. I mean, he always was generous with the refills. Like I didn't have to worry about calling him to get more Jardiance, more this, more that. He'd give me a whole year's refill. So I was happy. But regarding everything else, not much. People would say, "Oh, you have diabetes. You have to be careful." And I just keep doing it on my own.
Well, I appreciate you calling in and sharing that with us, Maurice, and I obviously wish you all the best in your health journey, but thank you for joining us today. And Laura, I could see you nodding while he's talking about that sort of that overwhelming, all of the medication and everything changing very quickly. Quite often, and as with the case was obviously with Maurice and with you, being adults, that brings up its own stressors, but quite often when it's children or even teens that are diagnosed, that can have a huge impact on their their social life, but also the way they perceive themselves and how they're worried about being perceived by their peers. What are some of the bigger challenges for people with, with juvenile diabetes?
Yeah. So, thanks for asking that because people can get diagnosed, from as young as 2 months
Yeah.
all the way through to teen years. And to your point, there's so many different challenges along the way there, because for some, they almost don't remember life before that.
True.
And but for many, there is a pre-diabetes and a post-diabetes, and all of a sudden going to other kids' birthday parties, going to school, and if you have to give yourself insulin at school,
Right.
a lot of schools don't have nurses anymore, don't have support. We have a lot of parents calling us to talk about the school has cut support, and so parents are expected to drive into the school. And you can imagine in some rural and remote areas,
Right.
this is very challenging. They have to drive in because the child may not be old enough.
Right.
To give, and to really manage to know what they're doing.
No, and it's a
And
matter
then
of life and death. This is,
yeah, exactly.
there's no choice.
In type 1 diabetes, so your caller and myself have type 2. There's really two main types, type 1 and type 2. And in type 1, known as juvenile diabetes, although less so now because there actually is adult onset diabetes, so type 1 diabetes. So people can get type 1. In fact, one of the volunteers that I work with, she was diagnosed at 50.
Wow.
But in type 1, what that means is your pancreas has just stopped making insulin. There's no insulin happening anymore. So you immediately have to go on insulin. And to your point, that's life-threatening. Whereas for me, my pancreas is making insulin, but it's a bit wonky. It doesn't do it all at the right time. It doesn't do it enough. And over time, like you heard your caller say, right now I'm on oral medication, but there may come a time when I need to go on insulin.
Okay.
But there's also time I might come off insulin. So it sort of depends. And so that is another misconception. People say, well, Laura, I've had people say this to me, well, if you're going to get a disease, you didn't get a bad one. And I'm like, what? And they're like, well, because there's insulin and it's a cure. Right. And and I said, no, it's a very important medication because before insulin, diabetes was terminal, right? You wouldn't survive. So insulin, and invented here in Canada by Dr. Banting, so huge
Amazing.
contribution to the world. But it's not a cure.
No.
And all that time. And so now a big improvement over the last decade, almost 2 decades, is a lot of technology. So I talked about my continuous glucose monitor.
Yeah, and you see those circular monitors on a lot of people's arms.
And then for a lot of kids, for example, the advent of the pumps that attach to their bodies is huge because, for example, then the parents aren't waking up in the middle of the night to check the blood sugars and prick the fingers anymore. The pump is actually delivering insulin when it's needed.
Right.
So that's very life-changing. And we run a camp. Well, we run 9 camps actually across the country for kids with diabetes every summer. And the thing I hear the most is the parents love their kid coming to camp. They're always a little nervous at first, but we have medical director and all that kind of stuff. And so everyone's well taken care of. But then they said, this is the first place where it's my child first and diabetes second. Because almost in every other aspect of life, it's got to be their diabetes first.
It just
if they're going into a new, it takes over everything.
Yeah, and for children, I mean, you never want to be seen as different than your peers, and that's such, that is such an obvious difference. So nice that they have that space to just exist together and be kids and have fun, as you said. The diabetes comes second to all of that. We'll get another call in now from Todd in Chilliwack. Hi, Todd. How are you? Hi, Todd. Are you there?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I understand that you and your wife have diabetes.
Correct. Type 2.
Type 2. And how have you found that? Well, first I should say, when were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed about, I don't know the exact date, but about, I don't know, 2018.
Okay.
2019.
Okay.
So about 6 or 7 years.
How have you found that sort of journey to living towards it and the impacts that it's had on your life?
Well, it's very hard. My mother had diabetes.
Okay.
And I used to watch her poking needles in her arm. And back then, they just used a regular hypodermic needle with a giant needle.
Right.
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
So now they use the pen.
Yeah.
And so I knew that I was susceptible to having diabetes
Okay.
because of my mother.
Okay. And
okay, so when I got diagnosed, like I seen on the thing on the TV here saying how your friends can help you, right? Well, your friends can only support you; they can't help you.
fair. And did
The
you
government-
find that support from your friends?
Well, my wife has it too. So I had, she got it like 8 years prior to me.
Oh wow.
Oh.
So I had major back surgery, back fusion surgery and stuff, and I was at home. So, and while she was out working and stuff, and I had nothing to do, I would go online and read up about diabetes and how I can support her. Right? What I can do to help her with it, right? Like don't bring candy home and leave it sitting on the table in front of her.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
That's just a small example, right? Bringing home white bread, that's another one. Bringing home white rice, that's another one. Bringing home anything white. So I didn't have a GP at the time.
That must have been
with the whole
difficult.
GP thing. My GP lived out 2 hours in Surrey, so I had no GP now.
Okay.
So I phoned and spoke with Dr. Elliott at the bcdiabetes.ca, and they said, come on out. So I drove all the way out to Vancouver, East Broadway, West Broadway, whatever it is, and they helped me out.
That's great. And how do you and your wife help each other out? How do you both
Well,
sort of support each other?
I want to just finish the BC Diabetes one.
Okay, so sorry.
They talked me into going on to the CGM, the Freestyle Libre.
Okay.
Okay? I got off the insulin. I was doing so well with that. Well, the Freestyle Libre makes you look at your phone, and there it is.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
When you got to go and when you got a finger prick, you got to go to the washroom or somewhere and wash your hands before you finger prick. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time, depending on what's on your hands. CGM, 100%. Right? Tells you what it is now. No sugar on your fingers or anything to make that problem. So I got on the CGM. The wife, we couldn't afford it for both of us. Right? Until the BC government said we're going to pay for it.
Right.
So I was on the Freestyle. I got off of the insulin. I was no longer doing insulin. My A1C was at 6.2. Perfect,
wow.
Right? Yeah.
Wow. Congratulations. I'm not there.
I'm not there anymore, but because of what happened is they decided to pay for the Freestyle Libre, but not. Sorry, the BC government said we'll pay for the CGM. They paid for the opposite, the competition, the Dexcom.
Okay.
So it took me 6 months to get it from the government. I'm back on the insulin again.
No, that's.
And I've been back on it ever since because I got cancer and blah blah blah, and I'm in the middle of chemo and everything like that. And it's very, very, very hard to keep your numbers and everything square when you're going through stuff like that all the time.
I can imagine.
I can only.
Oh, Todd, I'm so sorry.
So that's why when I saw, sorry to cut you off.
No, that's okay.
When I saw how I was living with diabetes impacted your life and support from your family. And I said that it's not support from the family. We need support from the provincial government, the medical system.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Todd. And I really appreciate you sharing everything with us. And again, I wish nothing but the best for your and your wife's health. We do have a call now from Rob in Salmon Arm. Hi, Rob. Thanks for calling in.
Yeah, you're welcome. Actually, I'd just like to talk about my wife who is diabetic.
Okay.
And we've been together for 26 years. She was diagnosed in her early 20s, so that's 40-odd years ago. And when we first got together, like your previous caller mentioned, the finger pricking, she would have to do that, I don't know, 20 times a day. And put it on the test strip, put it in the reader, wait your 30 seconds, and then it'll tell you your level, your sugar level. And her roller coaster was sometimes as low as 2 and up to 25, and so it was just out of control. Now, again, with the Libre system, it's constant monitoring. communicates with her telephone. There's an alarm goes off when the reading is abnormal and it's not that perfect horizontal 6 line.
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle of the night, I hear the alarm go off. And if she doesn't stir right away to look at that, I wish they would actually change it so that the tone was different, meaning a high or a low signal, so you could know which way you have to get up and treat the sugar levels.
Yeah, interesting.
And if she doesn't stir right away, and I hear that alarm go off 2 or 3 times, I know there's something serious, so I'm waking her up.
Right.
Then I'll touch her, and I feel wet, clammy skin, and I think, oh boy, she's going low on me here. So a couple times it's been almost to the level where it's dipping on 2, getting to that comatose state. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
But just while I was waiting on hold here, I looked up Banting and Best just to familiarize myself with the experiments where they would tie off the pancreas of the dog. And I think the humanity owes the dog, Marjorie, a huge debt of gratitude, because if it wasn't for that dog and their experiments, there would be no insulin.
Yes, it's very true.
Yes, Rob, thank you for calling in. And one thing we've heard from both of our callers is sort of these big advances that they've made in technology, so that you are able to monitor in real time. What are some of the? We're nearly out of time, but I'm just curious if there are any sort of new technologies coming down the pike that you're excited for.
Well, for the type 1, of course, the holy grail is a cure, right? Is a way to get your pancreas to, in a sense, turn back on its insulin-making powers. And there's lots of really interesting advances with stem cells around that, etc. With type 2, there's not as much around cure. The hot thing right now is remission.
Right.
So not only could you get off your insulin, but increasingly by following quite restrictive diets in my mind, but you can actually train your body back off medicines. Now, it's not for everybody. It's something I'm personally not interested in, but it's another tool in the toolbox. The other thing I think that's really increasing around it is research into the mental health aspects of diabetes, because you can imagine what your last caller was just saying, when someone's going low, there's just a lot of stress. There's actually a condition called diabetes distress.
I can imagine. Laura, I am so sorry, though. We are right up against the clock, and we're just about out of time. So I think we're just going to have you on again soon to talk about diabetes some more. Thank you so much. And that is our show for today. Thanks for calling and joining in.